At Christmas, my dad barked at me and my 7-year-old, "You're both grounded." Then he told us to eat alone in an empty room. My parents' dining room in Ridgewood, New Jersey, looked like something pulled straight from a holiday magazine. Every surface shone. Candles burned in careful symmetry. The good china, the one nobody was allowed to touch except once a year, reflected the warm light like proof that our family was exactly what it appeared to be. Perfect. At least from the outside. I sat beside my 7-year-old daughter, Lila, whose boots were still damp from the snow we'd tracked in minutes earlier. Her feet swung under the chair, never quite reaching the floor. She leaned close to me, whispering questions about the decorations, about dessert, about whether Grandpa had really cooked the ham himself. Across the table, my father, Harold Whitaker, carved the meat with slow authority, like he was performing a ceremony. My mother, Diane, corrected the placement of a napkin that was already perfectly folded. My younger sister Vanessa scrolled briefly through her phone before slipping it away when Dad glanced over. Everything ran on invisible rules here. Always had. Vanessa's daughter, Chloe, sat proudly beside her, showing off a glittering school ribbon while everyone leaned in with admiration. Compliments moved around the table easily when they were meant for her. I watched Lila notice it. Children always notice fairness before adults admit it exists. The conversation layered over itself. Promotions, neighbors, vacation plans. The comfortable noise of people who never expected to be challenged. Snow pressed softly against the windows. Christmas music hummed low in the background. And then Lila spoke. Clear, curious, completely unafraid. "Mom," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "When do we get the thing Great-Grandma said she left so we'd always be safe?" The fork in my father's hand stopped midair. Not slowed. Stopped. Silence didn't fall immediately. It spread. Subtle. Deliberate. Like everyone inhaled at the same time and forgot how to exhale. My mother laughed first, but the sound landed wrong. Too sharp. Too fast. "That's not dinner conversation," she said lightly. Lila blinked, confused. "I was just asking." Vanessa jumped in quickly, turning toward Chloe. "Sweetheart, tell Grandpa about your science award again." Applause followed, forced, enthusiastic, immediate. The moment moved away from Lila as if she'd never spoken. Except she had. And everyone knew it. I felt her shoulders curl inward beside me. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. A habit she'd picked up recently, one I recognized with painful familiarity. Someone chuckled softly down the table. Not with her. At her. Lila swallowed. "I'm sorry," she whispered automatically. The words hit me harder than anything else that night. Because no one had asked her to apologize yet. She'd learned to do it on her own. I placed my hand gently over hers. "Hey," I said quietly. "You don't need to apologize for asking a question." My mother's smile tightened. My father set his fork down carefully, the small clink louder than it should have been. "In this house," he said, voice calm but edged with steel, "children show respect." Lila nodded quickly, eyes wide. "I didn't mean—" "I know," I told her softly, keeping my hand over hers so she could feel I was still there. But my father leaned forward anyway. "You embarrassed the family," he said, pointing slightly with his knife. "You will apologize properly." The room watched. No one spoke. Not one person suggested she'd done nothing wrong. I felt something old stir inside me, a reflex built over decades. Smooth it over. Keep peace. Say sorry. End the tension quickly. It would have been easy. It always had been. But then Lila looked up at me, searching my face for instructions on how small she needed to become to fix the room. And suddenly I saw myself at her age. Same chair, same silence, same lesson. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. The word landed quietly, but it changed everything. My father's expression emptied, the way storms sometimes clear right before breaking. "She asked a question," I continued evenly. "That's not disrespect." My mother let out a short laugh. "You're a guest here, Elena." The name sounded less like affection and more like a reminder. A boundary. A hierarchy. Lila's fingers tightened around mine as if she sensed something shifting beneath the table. something bigger than a disagreement. My father stood slowly. The chair scraped across the floor. "You're both grounded," he said. The cousins stopped talking. Even the music felt quieter. He pointed toward the hallway. "Go eat alone." For a moment, nobody moved. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't about manners. It was a test. Not of my daughter, of me. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Grounded. The word hung in the air like something pulled from another decade. Something meant for slammed bedroom doors and confiscated phones, not a 32-year-old woman sitting beside her child at a Christmas dinner table. Lila's hand tightened in mine. "Mom?" she whispered, barely audible. Around us, nobody laughed. Nobody corrected him. No one said, "Dad, that's enough." Instead, the room settled into expectation. They were waiting for me to comply. My mother reached for her wine glass with slow composure, as if this were routine. "You need to learn your place," she added gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Across the table, Vanessa avoided my eyes, though the corner of her mouth curved upward. Not openly cruel, just entertained enough to stay silent. My father pointed again toward the hallway. Now, the hallway led to what they called the den, though it wasn't really a room anyone used. A folding card table sat there year-round, like punishment had permanent furniture. I felt Lila shrinking beside me, her shoulders folded inward, preparing to obey before the conflict could grow. I recognized the movement instantly, the instinct to make adults comfortable. I'd learned it here. I squeezed her hand. "We're not doing that," I said calmly. My father's eyes sharpened. "You will do what I say." Not raised, not shouted. Claimed. Ownership disguised as authority. And suddenly, I understood something with perfect clarity. He wasn't disciplining a child. He was reasserting control over me, reminding everyone at the table that leaving home hadn't changed the hierarchy. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped against hardwood, louder than his had been. Every conversation stopped. I stood still holding Lila's hand. "Thanks," I said evenly, "but we've already eaten." My mother blinked, stunned, like I'd spoken another language. My father's face darkened. "Sit down." I didn't. Instead, I helped Lila slide from her chair. Her boots hit the floor softly. She stayed close to my side, eyes moving quickly between faces that suddenly looked unfamiliar to her. Behind us, someone muttered, "Don't make a scene." But the scene had already been made. We just weren't playing our assigned roles anymore. As we walked toward the front hallway, my father's voice followed us. "Elena, get back here." The command echoed off the walls I'd grown up inside. I kept walking. Christmas stockings brushed my shoulder as we passed. Wrapped gifts glittered under the tree, untouched and suddenly meaningless. The smell of ham and cinnamon faded behind us. Vanessa appeared near the doorway, arms crossed. "You're being dramatic," she hissed. I met her gaze for the first time that night. "I'm being specific," I replied. Outside, cold air hit my face like waking up underwater. Snow crunched beneath our boots as I guided Lila toward the car. Behind us, the front door opened again. My mother's voice floated out, sweet and sharp at the same time. "You're making a mistake." Maybe. But for the first time, the mistake didn't feel like mine. I buckled Lila into her seat. Her hands stayed folded tightly in her lap. She stared straight ahead. The porch light illuminated the house, warm, glowing, perfect. Anyone driving past would have seen a happy family celebrating Christmas. They wouldn't have seen a child being taught to apologize for curiosity. I closed the car door and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, "Mom, did I do something bad?" The question landed heavier than anything my parents had said. I started the engine, letting the heater hum to life before answering. "No," I said gently. "You asked a normal question, but Grandpa said it was rude." I kept my eyes on the road as we pulled away. "Grandpa wanted you quiet," I said. "That's different." Streetlights slid across the windshield in slow intervals. Snow lined the sidewalks of Ridgewood, glowing faintly under decorations and wreaths. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't look. Not yet. Lila watched the passing houses, blinking quickly like she was trying not to cry. After a minute, she whispered, "Are we grounded?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how seriously she asked it. Like grounding was a legal condition that might follow us home. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "People don't ground adults." The words surprised me as I said them, because for most of my life, I'd acted like they could. The phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up at a red light. A message from my father filled the screen. "You will come back and apologize. Both of you." Another message followed immediately from my mother. "Learn your place." The light turned green. I set the phone face down, and as we drove into the quiet streets leading home, a memory surfaced. My great-grandmother's voice, calm and certain, from months earlier. "If they ever punish her for asking questions, call him." I didn't know yet what I was going to do. But for the first time, I knew one thing clearly. Tonight wasn't over. Home felt quieter than usual, not empty, just different. When I unlocked the door to our townhouse on Maple Crescent, warm air wrapped around us, carrying the faint smell of cinnamon candles I'd forgotten to blow out before we left. The hallway light Lila insisted on keeping on every night glowed softly, steady, and familiar. Safe. Lila stepped inside slowly, like she expected someone to correct her for walking too loudly. She slipped off her boots and lined them neatly against the wall without being asked. Another habit she'd learned too early. I hung up our coats and watched her for a moment. The tension hadn't left her shoulders yet. Kids didn't shake things off the way adults pretended to. "Hot chocolate?" I asked. She nodded immediately, relief flickering across her face. In the kitchen, I poured milk into a saucepan while she climbed onto one of the stools, pulling her knees up to her chest. The normal sounds, spoon against ceramic, the hum of the refrigerator, felt grounding after the sharp edges of my parents' house. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Then again. I ignored it. Tonight, silence was a boundary. Lila traced a finger along the wood grain of the counter. Grandma sounded mad. I stirred slowly. Sometimes adults get upset when they can't control a conversation. She thought about that seriously, like she was solving a puzzle. "I didn't want anyone mad," she said. I turned off the stove and placed the mug in front of her. "I know." She wrapped both hands around it, letting the warmth settle into her fingers. After a moment, she whispered, "I always say sorry so people feel better." The sentence landed hard. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. I crouched beside her stool so we were eye level. "You know something?" I said gently. "Saying sorry is for when you hurt someone, not for when you ask a question." She nodded slowly, though I could tell the idea felt new, like learning a different language. We sat together on the living room rug afterward while she arranged her new crayons from a Christmas gift into perfect color order. Every few seconds she glanced at me, waiting, maybe for a lecture, maybe for consequences that never came. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. My phone lit up again. "Dad." 3 missed calls. A voicemail followed immediately. "I didn't open it yet." Instead, I watched Lila carefully place a blue crayon beside a green one and felt something shift inside me, a realization that tonight hadn't started at dinner. It had started years ago, at backyard barbecues where spilled lemonade became a character flaw. At holidays where one child was praised for breathing while another was corrected for existing. At every moment I'd chosen peace over protection because arguing felt impossible. Lila leaned against my shoulder suddenly, warm and trusting. "Are they still mad?" she asked. "Probably," I admitted. She hesitated. "Will they stop loving us?" The question stole the air from my chest. I brushed her hair back gently. Love doesn't disappear because someone asks a question. Even as I said it, I knew something important. Sometimes access disappears instead. And maybe that was okay. She seemed satisfied with the answer and went back to coloring, humming softly under her breath. I finally picked up my phone and played the voicemail. My father's voice filled the room, slow and controlled. "You will bring Lila back tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Family meeting. You will apologize. Otherwise, you are not welcome in this family." The message ended with a click. No yelling, no emotion, just terms. I stared at the screen for a long moment. It sounded less like a father and more like a contract. Lila looked up. Was that Grandpa? I set the phone down carefully. Yes. What did he say? I considered how much truth a child needed. He wants us to come back, I said finally. She frowned slightly. Are we going? I looked around our living room. Mismatched pillows, unfinished puzzles, drawings taped crookedly to the wall. Nothing perfect. Nothing staged. Everything real. No, I said quietly. She nodded once, accepting it without argument, and returned to coloring. Later that night, after she fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, I stood in her doorway watching her breathe, steady and peaceful. And I realized something strange. When people finally stop accepting unfair rules, the silence afterward feels terrifying, but also freeing. If you've ever had a moment where choosing calm felt harder than choosing conflict, you understand why my hands trembled as I walked back to the kitchen. Because I knew exactly what memory was coming next. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. The kitchen clock read 9:12 p.m., but the house felt suspended outside of time. I stood at the counter staring at my phone, my father's voicemail still glowing on the screen. The words replayed whether I wanted them to or not. You are not welcome in this family. For most of my life, that sentence would have broken me. Tonight, it landed differently. Heavy, yes, but clearer. Like something finally said out loud instead of implied. I poured myself a glass of water and didn't drink it, because another voice had started rising in my memory. Older, softer, certain. My great-grandmother Ruth Whitaker never raised her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, people leaned closer without realizing they were doing it. The last real conversation we'd had came back to me with uncomfortable precision. It had been late summer, months before she passed. Everyone else was outside watching a football game on the patio while I helped her dry dishes in my parents' kitchen. The window had been open, letting warm air drift in along with laughter from outside. She turned the faucet on low, the running water masking our voices. Lila asks questions like I used to, she said casually. I smiled. She definitely does. Ruth dried her hands slowly, studying me in a way that suddenly made me nervous. If they ever punish her for asking, she said, don't argue. I frowned immediately. What do you mean? She folded the towel carefully before answering. You won't win a shouting match in this house, she said. You'll just teach her that love comes with silence. At the time, I'd laughed it off. My parents could be strict, sure, but punishment? Over questions? It sounded dramatic. Now, standing alone in my kitchen months later, the memory didn't feel dramatic at all. It felt precise. Ruth reached into her apron pocket that day and pulled out a small folded card. She pressed it into my hand. A name. A phone number. Martin S., she said. He handles my financial matters. I stared at the card, confused. Why would I need this? Her eyes softened when she answered. Because I promised Lila she would always be safe. The wording had struck me as odd back then. Safe from what? Our family wasn't dangerous. At least, that's what I believed. Promise me, she added quietly. I nodded, mostly to reassure her. I hadn't understood I was agreeing to something real. Back in the present, I opened a drawer and leaned against the counter, breathing slowly. The pattern suddenly connected itself. Tonight at dinner, Lila hadn't mentioned money. She hadn't asked about inheritance. She'd repeated Ruth's exact language, something that keeps us safe. And my parents' reaction hadn't been embarrassment. It had been fear. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my father's messages. Come back, apologize, family meeting. Not requests, commands. Like they still believed consequences applied to me. A cold realization settled into place. They weren't angry because Lila was rude. They were angry because she'd said something she wasn't supposed to know. I walked to the hall closet almost without thinking. A plastic storage bin sat on the top shelf, small keepsakes Ruth had given me over the years. Recipes, old photographs, a crocheted blanket she insisted Lila would someday appreciate. I pulled it down and sat on the floor. The faint scent of cedar drifted out when I opened it. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to close the lid and pretend tonight was just another family argument that would fade with time. But another part, The part that had walked out of my parents' house without looking back? Knew better. I moved aside folded fabric and small tins until my fingers brushed something stiff. A laminated recipe card. I turned it over. There it was. Neat handwriting. Martin S., a phone number written clearly beneath. My chest tightened. I held the card longer than necessary, remembering Ruth closing my fingers around it months ago. Don't warn anyone, don't negotiate. At the time, it had sounded almost paranoid. Now it sounded like preparation. Down the hallway, Lila shifted in her sleep, the faint creak of her bed grounding me in the present. This wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It wasn't even about my parents. It was about understanding why Ruth had expected this moment long before it happened. I set the card on the kitchen table beside my phone. Outside, snow continued to fall, soft and steady. And for the first time since leaving dinner, I felt something stronger than anger. Clarity, because whatever my parents were trying to control, Ruth had already planned for it, and I was finally ready to find out why. The card stayed on the kitchen table for nearly 20 minutes before I touched it again. I told myself I was thinking, processing, giving everyone time to calm down. The truth was simpler. I was afraid of what would change once I knew the full story. Outside, snow drifted past the window in slow spirals, softening the streetlights along Maple Crescent. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. My phone buzzed again. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed seconds later. We love Lila. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Another message appeared almost immediately from Dad. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Final chance to fix this. Fix this. Like my daughter's dignity was a misunderstanding that needed correction. I flipped the phone face down. For years, I had responded automatically, smoothing tension before it could grow, apologizing even when I didn't fully understand what I'd done wrong. Peacekeeping felt safer than conflict. But tonight, every message felt different. Not emotional. Strategic. I sat at the table and opened my notes app, typing slowly. Christmas dinner. Punish child for asking about safety. Seeing the words written plainly made my stomach tighten. Stripped of family language, the situation looked colder, clearer. Down the hallway, Lila murmured in her sleep. I stood instinctively and checked on her. She was curled around her stuffed rabbit, hair spread across the pillow, breathing evenly. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her room. She looked completely safe, and suddenly I understood what Ruth had meant. Safety wasn't about money, it was about choice. About never feeling trapped somewhere you had to shrink to belong. I closed her door gently and returned to the kitchen. The recipe card waited where I'd left it. I picked it up again, tracing the ink with my thumb. The handwriting felt steady, intentional. Like Ruth had known I would hesitate. I remembered her voice at the sink. You don't argue, you call. My chest tightened. Calling meant admitting this wasn't just family drama. It meant accepting that something larger had been happening behind conversations I'd never been included in. Another notification lit up my phone. A voicemail transcription from Dad appeared on the screen. If you keep Lila from us, this will not end well. The words settled heavily in the quiet room. Not concern. A warning. That decided it. I plugged my phone into the charger so the battery wouldn't die mid-call. Then I gathered documents almost without thinking. My ID, Lila's birth certificate, the folder where I kept school records. I didn't know why I was collecting them yet, only that it felt necessary. The clock changed to 9 p.m. I sat down, placed the card beside my phone, and rested my hands flat on the table until they stopped trembling. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if I was overreacting? What if tomorrow's meeting really was just about smoothing things over? Then I remembered Lila whispering, "Did I do something bad?" And the doubt disappeared. I dialed the number. The line rang once, twice. A calm male voice answered. Martin speaking. My throat felt dry. Hi, this is Elena Whitaker. I'm Ruth's granddaughter. There was a pause. Not confused, not surprised, almost expectant. I was wondering when you'd call, he said quietly. My grip tightened around the phone. She told me to contact you if my parents ever punished my daughter for asking a question. Another brief silence followed. Then his tone shifted, professional, focused. Are you safe right now? The question startled me. Yes, I said quickly. We left. My daughter's asleep. Good, he replied. I can't discuss details over the phone tonight, but I can confirm I'm involved with arrangements your grandmother made concerning your child. My heart began to pound. My parents are acting like they control everything, I admitted. Martin exhaled slowly. Here's what you're going to do, he said. You don't sign anything. You don't attend family meetings. And you document every message they send. I glanced at my phone, already lighting up again. Okay, I said. I need to meet you in person, he continued. First business day. Bring identification and your daughter's birth certificate. I looked at the documents already stacked beside me. I have them ready. Good, he said gently. And Elena, they do not get to discipline a beneficiary into silence. The word hit me. Beneficiary. When the call ended, the house felt different. Not quieter, protected. And for the first time since Christmas dinner, I realized something that made my parents' reaction finally make sense. Lila hadn't just asked a question. She had touched something they couldn't control anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, pieces of the evening rearranged themselves. My father's expression freezing when Lila spoke, Vanessa redirecting the conversation too quickly, my mother's voice sharpening beneath polite laughter. None of it looked accidental anymore. By morning, snow had turned to gray slush along the sidewalks. I moved through our routine carefully, keeping everything normal for Lila. Breakfast, hair brushed, backpack zipped. She watched me closely, as if checking whether the world had shifted overnight. Are we still in trouble? She asked while tying her shoes. I knelt in front of her. No, we're just handling grown-up stuff. She accepted that answer with surprising ease and hugged me before heading into her winter break program, disappearing through the doors with the other kids. I waited until she was inside before exhaling. Then I drove downtown. The office building Martin had given me the address for sat between a law firm and a small accounting agency. Plain glass doors. Nothing dramatic. If I hadn't been looking for it, I might have walked right past. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and printer paper. A man in his late 50s stood when I entered. Button-down shirt, winter coat folded neatly over his arm. Elena? He asked. I nodded. He shook my hand firmly. Martin. No sympathy, no theatrics. Just calm professionalism, which somehow steadied me more than comfort would have. His office was modest, shelves lined with binders, framed certifications, a desk organized with precise efficiency. A single folder sat waiting at the center. Martin didn't rush. Before we begin, he said, I need to confirm something. Has anyone asked you to sign documents since Ruth passed? No, I said. They kept telling me there was nothing I needed to worry about. He gave a small, unsurprised nod. Then he turned the folder toward me. The label read, Rosalie Whittaker Trust. My breath caught. Ruth established a minors' trust, Martin explained. Your daughter is the beneficiary. I stared at the words without touching them. So, my parents weren't managing it? Martin allowed himself a faint smile. Your father was managing your father. He slid a chart toward me. Beneficiary, Lila Whittaker. Legal parent, Elena Whittaker. Trustee, Northbridge Fiduciary Services, institutional. No family member has authority, he said clearly. That was intentional. Something inside my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. Then why did they react like that at dinner? I asked. Martin leaned back slightly. Because your daughter asked about the one thing they cannot control. The answer landed with unsettling simplicity. He opened another section of the file and placed several printed emails in front of me. I recognized my father's name immediately. The messages were polite, professional, calculated. My father had written to the trustee weeks earlier asking about procedures for ensuring stable financial oversight for a minor beneficiary. Vanessa had followed with a cheerful message offering herself as a potential financial guardian due to her close relationship with the child. My stomach turned. She barely sees Lila, I said quietly. Martin nodded. They were preparing to petition for guardianship of the property. Not custody, but control over distributions. A draft petition sat beneath the emails. Dated before Christmas. My hands went cold. They were already planning this, I whispered. Yes, Martin said gently. And then your daughter publicly acknowledged the trust existed. The dinner replayed in my mind instantly. The silence. The panic hidden behind politeness. They weren't embarrassed, I realized aloud. They were threatened. Martin didn't argue. Ruth anticipated conflict, he said. That's why she appointed professional oversight and instructed you to contact me if pressure began. I sat back in the chair, absorbing it all. Every learn your place, every dismissal after the funeral, every locked door and withheld document. It hadn't been grief. It had been strategy. Martin folded his hands. I need your authorization to notify the trustee that all communication must go through verified legal channels. That prevents interference. Yes, I said immediately. He drafted the notice while I watched, attaching copies of my identification and Lila's birth certificate. The language was calm, almost boring, which made it powerful. When I signed, my hand didn't shake. Martin sent the email, then placed a copy in a folder for me. Keep this, he said. And don't let anyone else hold the paperwork again. Outside the office, cold wind rushed between buildings as I stepped onto the street. The world looked the same. But something fundamental had changed. For the first time, I understood why my father's voice had sounded so certain at dinner. He thought control was already his. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't. The messages started before I even reached my car. My phone lit up repeatedly in my coat pocket, vibrating hard enough that I could feel it through the fabric. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Still, I waited until I was seated behind the wheel before unlocking the screen. 5 missed calls. 2 from my mother, 3 from my father. A voicemail arrived while I watched. I pressed play. Emma! My father's voice snapped through the speaker before correcting itself. Elena, why is the trustee refusing to speak to us? There it was. Not anger. Panic. I stared at the dashboard for a long moment, letting the silence settle after the message ended. Snowmelt dripped slowly down the windshield outside Martin's office building. Another voicemail followed immediately. My mother this time, her voice tight with forced calm. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. Call us so we can fix this quietly. Fix. Always fix. I set the phone down without responding and started the engine. For years, urgency from them had meant obligation for me. Today, it felt different. Like watching a storm from inside a locked house instead of standing in the rain. By the time I picked Lila up that afternoon, the tone had shifted again. Texts filled my screen. You went behind our backs. Family doesn't involve outsiders. You're escalating something unnecessary. I buckled Lila into her seat and smiled when she handed me a paper snowflake she'd made. Look, Mom, it didn't rip this time. It's perfect, I told her, and meant it. Children measured success differently. No power struggles, no hidden motives, just effort and pride. As we drove home, she chatted about crafts and snacks, and a girl who traded crackers for juice boxes. Ordinary details that grounded me while my phone buzzed endlessly beside me. At a red light, another message appeared. Vanessa, you're really doing this to family? I almost laughed. Doing what? Telling the truth? I didn't answer. That evening, after dinner, the calls escalated again. My father left another voicemail, shorter this time. What did you do? He demanded. Not why. Not are you okay. Just accusation. I saved every message into a folder labeled Christmas, exactly the way Martin instructed. Screenshot, archive, document. The process felt strangely calming, like building a record instead of defending myself in real time. Lila sat on the floor nearby coloring, occasionally glancing up at me. Grandpa keeps calling? She asked. Yes, she thought about that. Are you mad? I shook my head. No, I'm just not rushing anymore. She nodded as if that made complete sense. Later, after she went to bed, I opened the family group chat for the first time since Christmas dinner. Photos filled the screen. Smiling faces, leftover desserts, captions about wonderful family memories. My mother had posted one an hour earlier. Some people choose distance instead of respect. We hope healing comes soon. The implication was clear. They were telling the story first. I watched the messages scroll beneath it. Sympathetic replies, confused cousins, neutral emojis from relatives who didn't want to take sides yet. The old version of me would have jumped in immediately, explaining, defending, smoothing. Instead, I closed the chat. Silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was space. If you've ever stepped back from an argument and felt the strange calm that follows, the moment you realize you don't actually have to convince everyone, then you know why I set my phone down without typing a single word. Because something important was becoming obvious. Their control depended on speed, pressure, reaction. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. The next morning proved how quickly that unsettled them. A certified letter arrived just after breakfast. The envelope was thick, official-looking. Lila looked up from her cereal. "Is it mail for me?" "Not this one," I said gently. I waited until she left the room before opening it. Inside was a legal filing. My sister's name sat boldly at the top. Petition for emergency appointment. Words jumped off the page. Unstable, erratic, unfit decision-making. They weren't trying to control the trust quietly anymore. They were trying to go around me. I read every page slowly, my heartbeat steady instead of racing. Because underneath the accusations, one thing was clear. They had moved too fast. And this time, I already had the truth documented. I closed the packet and placed it beside Martin's folder. The fight wasn't coming. It had already started. And strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. I finished reading the petition twice before I allowed myself to react. The language was clinical, carefully chosen to sound concerned instead of aggressive. Words like stability, best interests, and family support appeared again and again, wrapped around accusations that painted me as impulsive, emotionally reactive, and incapable of managing decisions affecting my child. If I hadn't lived the last week myself, I might have believed it. I set the papers flat on the kitchen table and smoothed the edges automatically, the way my mother used to do with important documents. The habit made me pause. So many of my instincts still came from her. Lila padded into the room in her socks. "Was that important mail?" I folded the packet calmly. "Just grown-up paperwork." She nodded and reached for an apple, unconcerned, trusting the world to stay steady because I told her it was. That trust settled something inside me. After dropping her at her program, I called Martin. "They filed," I said simply when he answered. "I expected they might," he replied. No surprise, no alarm. "Bring the documents, we'll prepare a response." His calm anchored me again. At his office, we spread everything across the desk. The petition, screenshots of messages, voicemails, timelines I'd already started organizing. Martin added tabs to a binder with quiet efficiency. "Emergency petitions require urgency," he explained. "Courts look for immediate danger. Their filing relies on narrative, not facts." Narrative. The word stayed with me, because that's exactly what my family had always controlled. The story. Martin pointed to one paragraph. "They claim you are isolating the child from extended family." I let out a breath. "I left one dinner." "Yes," he said evenly. "But written this way, it sounds like escalation." He slid a yellow sticky note toward me. "We respond with documentation, not emotion." That sentence changed how I saw everything. For years, arguments in my family were won by volume, tears, or persistence. Facts had never mattered as much as presentation. Now presentation was finally on my side. The courthouse hallway smelled like wet coats and old paper when the hearing day arrived. People shuffled past carrying folders and coffee cups, their conversations low and hurried. My parents stood together near the benches. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue before the hearing even began. My father's posture was rigid, controlled, as if confidence alone could rewrite reality. Vanessa stood slightly ahead of them, dressed carefully neutral. Soft colors, calm expression, the image of concern. She smiled when she saw me. It didn't reach her eyes. I took a seat quietly, my binder resting on my lap. Martin sat several rows behind me, not speaking, just present, exactly as he'd promised. When our case was called, we stepped forward. The judge glanced down at the paperwork, glasses low on her nose. Emergency petitions require emergency facts, she said plainly. Vanessa began first. Your Honor, we're deeply worried about Lila's stability. The judge raised a hand. Concern alone is not an emergency. The interruption startled her. I opened my binder and handed copies to the clerk. Screenshots, timestamps, messages demanding apologies, threats of exclusion, instructions ordering me back like a child. I spoke calmly. My daughter was punished for asking about a trust established for her protection. After I declined to comply, my family attempted to pursue financial authority without informing me. The courtroom grew very quiet. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. She turned toward Vanessa. Why are you requesting financial guardianship when a professional trustee exists? Vanessa hesitated. My father spoke instead. Because Elena is making this unnecessarily difficult. The judge looked directly at him. This court is not a tool for family control. The words landed like a door closing. 10 minutes later, the ruling came. Petition denied. No emergency conditions established. Additional restrictions placed on interference with the legal parent or trustee communications. Simple, final, calm. Outside the courtroom, my mother called after me, voice trembling with anger now that performance no longer mattered. You're tearing this family apart. I paused, turning back briefly. No, I said quietly. I stopped pretending everything was fine. I walked toward the exit without waiting for a response. Outside, cold air filled my lungs, sharper than before but easier to breathe. For the first time since Christmas dinner, the story wasn't being written for me anymore. And somewhere between the courthouse doors and my car, I realized something unexpected. Winning didn't feel loud. It felt peaceful. Losing in court didn't make my parents quiet. It made them strategic. Within 24 hours, the messages started arriving from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. Cousins, distant relatives, even an aunt who usually avoided family drama altogether. Are you okay? Your mom said you won't let anyone see Lila. What's going on? I stared at the screen, recognizing the pattern instantly. My mother had moved the conflict into safer territory. Public sympathy. If she told the story first, she controlled how everyone understood it. I opened the family group chat cautiously. There it was. A long message from her posted earlier that morning. Elena has chosen to distance herself from the family. Our door remains open when respect returns. Below it, my father added, Lila will always have a place here. Elena won't. That line sat heavier than the rest. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed the strategy completely. Separate the child from the parent. Frame it as love. I locked my phone and set it on the counter, breathing slowly. The old version of me would have typed paragraphs explaining everything. Screenshots, emotional appeals, attempts to make people understand. But Martin's voice echoed in my mind. Documentation, not emotion. That afternoon, while Lila worked on homework at the dining table, I opened the folder Martin had given me after the hearing. Inside was a document I hadn't paid much attention to yet. A trust summary outlining assets connected to Lila's protection. One line stopped me cold. Property held in trust for the benefit of the minor beneficiary. The address listed beneath it was instantly familiar. My parents' house. I read it again to be sure. Ruth hadn't just created financial protection. She had structured the house itself under trust conditions tied to Lila's welfare, which meant something simple and explosive at the same time. My parents didn't own the home the way everyone believed they did. Access depended on compliance with trust terms. I sat back slowly, understanding why Martin had waited to explain this part fully. This wasn't revenge. It was leverage designed to prevent exactly what was happening now. My phone buzzed again. Another relative asking why I'd banned myself from family gatherings. I opened the group chat. For a moment, my hands hovered over the keyboard. Then I attached a single PDF. No commentary. No accusations. Just the trust summary document. Above it, I typed one sentence. This property is held under Lila's trust protections. Any exclusion of her legal parent violates the agreement. I pressed send. The chat went silent. Not slow silence, immediate silence. The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Returned again. Finally, my uncle replied. Wait, what does this mean? Another cousin followed. Are you serious? My mother responded quickly. That's being misunderstood. But documents don't argue. They don't raise voices or cry or redirect conversations. They just exist. Vanessa didn't reply at all. I watched the conversation shift in real time, confusion replacing certainty, questions replacing assumptions. For the first time, the narrative wasn't about me being dramatic. It was about why my parents had tried so hard to control something that legally wasn't theirs. I set the phone down and looked across the table at Lila. She was concentrating fiercely on spelling homework, tongue slightly pressed against her lip. "Mom," she said without looking up, "how do you spell brave?" The question caught me off guard. "Brave," I answered. She wrote it carefully, then smiled to herself. I realized then that none of this, courtrooms, documents, arguments, was the real victory. The real change was quieter. She wasn't apologizing for existing anymore. That evening, my father finally called directly instead of leaving messages. I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded immediately. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I told the truth," I said calmly. A long silence followed. "You're humiliating us." I looked at the papers spread across the table, then at my daughter humming softly nearby. "No," I said. "I stopped protecting lies." He hung up without another word. The house felt peaceful afterward. Outside, winter settled deeper into the neighborhood, lights glowing warmly in windows up and down the street. For the first time since Christmas, nothing felt uncertain. The truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was visible. And once people see something clearly, it becomes very hard to pretend it was never there. The official notice arrived a week later, certified mail. I recognized my father's handwriting on the return receipt when he signed for it. Martin had warned me the trustee would act once interference crossed a certain line. Still, seeing the process unfold felt surreal, like watching consequences move through the world without anyone raising their voice. My phone rang less after that, not silent but different. Careful. When my father finally called again, his tone had changed completely. "We should move forward," he said stiffly, avoiding any mention of court, petitions, or threats. No reason to keep fighting. I stood at the kitchen window while he spoke, watching Lila outside attempting to build a snow fort that leaned dangerously to one side. "Moving forward," I repeated quietly, "means respecting boundaries." A pause followed. Then, reluctantly, "Of course." It wasn't agreement. It was recognition. The trustee's notice had been clear. Continued retaliation against the beneficiary or exclusion of her legal parent could result in termination of their occupancy rights. For the first time in my life, authority didn't belong to whoever spoke the loudest. It belonged to structure, to preparation, to Ruth. Months passed. The emergency petition disappeared into procedural silence. Family gatherings continued without invitations that felt like traps. Some relatives drifted toward neutrality. Others simply stopped asking questions once the legal facts became impossible to ignore. The loudness faded. And in the quiet, something unexpected happened. Lila changed. Not dramatically. No sudden speeches or bold declarations. Just small shifts that felt enormous if you knew what to look for. She stopped apologizing when she asked for water. Stopped saying sorry when she needed help tying her shoes. One afternoon, she raised her hand at the park and told another child, calmly, "That's my turn now." I watched from a bench, realizing she wasn't learning confidence. She was unlearning fear. A letter arrived for her near the end of winter, forwarded through Martin's office in an envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. Ruth's. Inside was a short note written before she passed. Lila sounded out the words slowly while sitting beside me on the couch. "You were brave enough to ask questions," it read. "So I made sure you would always be safe." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't hide them. She didn't apologize either. She leaned against me instead, holding the letter carefully like something alive. "Great-grandma knew?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "She knew you'd need choices." That night, after Lila went to bed, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything that had changed since Christmas dinner. Nothing dramatic on the surface. Same house, same routines, same quiet evenings, but the rules were different now. Access to my child no longer came through obedience. Love no longer required silence, and family no longer meant surrender. My phone buzzed once, a message from Vanessa. We should put this behind us. I read it, then locked the screen without replying. Some chapters don't need conversations to end. They just need distance. I walked down the hallway and checked on Lila one last time. She slept sprawled across her bed, stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, breathing slow and steady. Safe. The word finally meant something real. Standing there, I understood what Ruth had truly protected. Not money, not property, not even inheritance. She had protected the right for a child to ask questions without fear. And maybe you know the moment I'm talking about. The one where you realize peace doesn't come from winning an argument, but from refusing to repeat a pattern. That quiet decision changes everything, even when no one else notices right away. I turned off the hallway light and closed her door gently behind me. Christmas had started with a punishment meant to make us smaller. It ended with something far stronger, a promise kept, and a future where my daughter would never have to learn her place, because she already knew her worth.